we would like to acknowledge the traditional owners of the land on which we stand, the people of the Kulin Nations, and pay our respects to their elders, past, present, and emerging.
Hello everyone, I'm Claire Spencer. I'm the Chief Executive of Arts Centre Melbourne, and I'm joined today by Greta, and I'm going to let Greta introduce herself.
Hey, I'm Greta Bradman. I'm a classical singer and recording artist. I present Weekend Brunch on ABC Classic, and I'm a psychologist. I work in private practice, and I guess my two sides, the artistic and the psych worlds, come together around my research and work around mental health and wellbeing for those who work in the performing arts. And I have been involved in the Arts Wellbeing Collective since, Claire, you got it going. And I sit on the advisory board.
Great. We're going to be going through some questions that have been submitted from our community, specifically around the Arts Wellbeing Collective. So the first, I'm just going to make sure I get the questions right. So this is a really interesting one to start with, actually. So I'll let you go first, Greta. But someone's asked, you both have a role in looking after others, but what do you do for your own mental health and well-being and self-care?
That's a good one. Actually, I reckon this might be a good moment. Do you mind if I actually read the World Health Organization definition? Would that be okay? Because I think it sort of does tie in, I guess, to the things that I do that I would consider to have a big impact on my mental health. So the WHO defines mental health as a state of well-being in which an individual realises his or her own abilities, can cope with the normal stresses of life, can work productively, and is able to make a contribution to their community. So yeah, isn't it? I mean, yeah, so I'd say exercise, sleep, and connecting with others would be the big ones. And then alongside that, I have found that I've really needed to manage my stress levels at the moment. So sort of little micro moments for mindfulness where you really drop into the present moment and connect back and really take that time to kind of smell the smells around you, you know, when you're going for a walk in the morning or look at nature. And actually intentionally doing that is definitely something that I've done. So there's a question for you here, Claire. How did the idea for the Arts Wellbeing Collective initiative come about?
Yeah, it's a question I'm often asked because I think it's a deeply unusual thing that we've done. We haven't been able to find an example of it anywhere else in the world. It was a very values-led initiative when it started. It happened at a time when we had suffered a loss with a member of our team. And also at the same time, a whole raft of data was released about mental health, the pervasiveness of mental health issues in the live performance sector. So a combination of the data and that deeply personal experience that we had, we realised we had to do more than just provide, you know, the classic kind of supports that you'd find, like, you know, employee assistance programs and all of those kind of things. So we set out to sort of find something that was very appropriate for the members of the Arts Centre Melbourne team, and worked with recognising that none of us were psychologists, working with Michael Carr-Gregg and Greta. That was when we first met you, to create something that was appropriate, because we couldn't find anything off the shelf. There was nothing that was translatable into the environment of live performance. So we ended up sort of with creating this. It was really a framework at the beginning, and I remember distinctly my team sort of talking me through it, and it was at that moment we realised that this was something quite extraordinary and unlike anything we'd seen before, and that really, as a major player in the live performance sector, with one of our values being leadership, that we felt a really deep sort of obligation, but in the good sense of the word, to sort of take this outside of the boundaries of Arts Centre Melbourne. So we thought in that first year that we might get maybe 10 or 15 other organisations involved and interested. I think by the end of the pilot year, we had like 140 organisations. So we realised pretty quickly that there was an enormous demand for the work of the Arts Wellbeing Collective out there in the community. And it really just grew from that. So we didn't set out to create what it's ended up being, but I think just being very responsive to the need and the feedback we were getting, it just evolved to the point where it is at now.
I remember at the time you saying that it was the quickest yes when you reached out to some other leaders of other arts centres and other arts organisations that you'd ever had.
It's so true. And I sent it out by email just because, I was trying to articulate what it was we were trying to do. And I was thinking, no one's going to understand what this is and why we're doing it. And so I was astonished when we sort of, got these instant responses back. Yes, we want to be involved. We're concerned about this. It's a real problem. It was, if only it was always that straightforward to get people involved. But no, it was really good. Right. I want to make sure that we don't miss any of these great questions. Okay, Greta, I think this is one that you would be terrific to answer as a practicing artist. Can you just share what are some of the unique challenges faced by people in the live performance sector that perhaps makes them a little bit more prevalent to mental health issues?
Well, I think that the uniqueness of the challenges, because I think that the challenges that we face within the performing arts, a lot of them can be found in other industries as well. But the uniqueness of the challenges is probably the sheer number of so many challenges coming together within our industry. So I can't help but kind of have my psych hat on just a little bit when I say this. So CareerCast, which is this big kind of survey company, they survey annually the top 10 most stressful professions. And some of the risk factors identified by CareerCast as risk factors for stress within work includes career growth potential, meeting the public, working in the public eye, competitiveness, risk, travel, physical demands, and environmental conditions. So that's pretty much, you could be just superimposing all of those into the performing arts. So alongside that, there are the long hours. So if you think of a performance a little bit like the tip of an iceberg, and there's this enormous, body of iceberg below the surface that you can't see, and that's the preparation and the practice, all of the people and all of the work that goes into that part of the iceberg. And so that means that it really has an impact on the lives of those involved. It means that when those working within the performing arts, they can't kind of stretch their wings and maintain relationships with others outside of the performing arts, including family sometimes, or even sometimes those outside of the current show. And so what that means is that what happens in the arts bubble can quite understandably become of greater and greater importance to someone. And this can be really detrimental to mental health. And of course, the old saying, the show must go on, also really counts toward this as well. So, that deadline, when the curtain rises, it rises, that is immovable. So the pressure can be extreme from all of these things. So you do see higher rates of symptoms of depression and anxiety. You also see higher rates of drug and alcohol problems as well. So there are absolutely, a sort of a kaleidoscope of pressures and problems that intersect around the environment of the performing arts. Now, a lot of those can't be changed. So what they necessitate is a lot of support to really help support mental health and good mental health. And there's some really fantastic research to show that if you do actively mitigate against some of the risk factors in terms of their impact on the individual, you can support good mental health. So it isn't the case that, and I do wonder if maybe this goes some way to explaining why no one has done something like the Arts Wellbeing Collective before, which is that whole, artists just, and those working within the performing arts are just somehow predisposed to mental health issues. And it's simply not the case. That, research, a large body and a growing body, ever-growing body of research around predictors of mental health for those who work within the performing arts industry clearly shows that it's the conditions and the environment. And as I say, a lot of those, including that curtain rising, they can't be shifted. We have to accept them and work around them and provide support that is really, I guess, specific for those who work within such a unique industry.
It's interesting, as I've talked over the last few years about the Arts Wellbeing Collective to people who aren't involved in the sector, that idea of the tortured artist is something that's frequently put on the table, and don't you have to be slightly unhinged to work in live performance? And I think it's one of the myths that we really do need to bust that myth. But also there's the other challenges can't they just use the normal support networks? But you can't tell an artist who's on the road for months at a time to spend more time with friends and family and to go to bed earlier, and it doesn't those strategies just don't translate into the sector. And I look at some of the resources that the team have been, the Arts Wellbeing Collective team have created over the last little while, and the one about touring is a really good example of strategies that you can employ to just not to take away the stress of being on tour, but to provide some frameworks that can buffer the individual against that stress becoming unmanageable. This is something that will continue to evolve. And as the industry evolves, we're going through an enormous trauma now with COVID-19, and the impact on the live performance industry was immediate and devastating. And I think we'll be living with that for many years to come. And I'm deeply worried about that. I think there's been a lot of publicity, as there should be, around the financial hardship that comes from this.
Can I ask you actually on that, Claire? Sorry to interrupt. I'm just thinking, question really. So we have a question here. Yes. How is the Arts Wellbeing Collective / Arts Centre helping artists during this time? And then there's actually another question which might be related. I'll give them both to you, and you can. Why aren't we raising funds to help with basic living costs for artists? Yes.
So I'll take you back to I think it was 3 days after we had closed in the middle of March, and there were a small team of us still working at the Arts Centre. And it had become very apparent immediately upon the industry closing down that there were going to be many people out of work, and stories about people's 2 years worth of work being cancelled, gigs being cancelled. It was very it was a very high profile piece of news. So we sat round and we really did debate, well, what's our role in this? And we talked about, should we set up a support, financial hardship type fund and focus on raising money and distributing those funds. And we realised pretty quickly that there were actually already other organisations in the community who do this brilliantly. And the two that rose to the top for us were Support Act, who we know well because we partner with them on our helpline service for the Arts Wellbeing Collective, and also the Victorian Actors Benevolent Fund. So we felt that duplicating what those organisations were already doing so brilliantly would actually be a waste of resources. So instead, we did the quite unusual thing of suggesting to both our existing donors and also to people who were able to get a refund on a ticket that they had bought for the closure period, that they might like to consider not donating to Arts Centre Melbourne, but donating to Support Act or the Victorian Actors Benevolent Fund. And we believe that a healthy level of donations flowed into both of those excellent organisations. Where we felt we could add value and have an impact after that initial sort of 4-week period was to really think about, well, other than financial hardship, what are people going through at the moment? And we realised from talking to people in our own community that, you know, there's a deep emotional trauma involved in this. Of course, the financial hardship is terrible. Nothing I say can take away from the absolute devastation of livelihoods. But we wanted to make sure that there were some emotional supports for artists through this time, but also once we get into the recovery phase, which inevitably we will. So that's where we decided the Arts Wellbeing Collective had a role to play, and worked, have decided that that's where our resources can be best directed, but also recognising those partnerships that we have with Support Act and the Victorian Actors Benevolent Fund to really make sure that the financial hardship isn't forgotten, but also that this side of the equation also is taken into account. So we've been developing resources over the last few weeks for both the Arts Wellbeing Collective and the Arts Centre Melbourne team. They've all been shared through various social media channels and through partner channels. And, you know, the feedback we're getting is that they are valued and that they're making a difference. And, the other thing just to mention in this context as well is our program that we have under the Wellbeing Collective about training mental health first aiders, and that's been a big, there's been a big push into that space over the last couple of years. And I know from anecdotal feedback from people who've been through that program, it's been incredibly valuable for them over this time to both be able to self-support but also support others who may be struggling. So that's an area we really want to ramp up as well, just making sure that we have as many qualified mental health first aiders out there in the community as we can. So another question that we've got actually relates to the crisis that's hit the sector and many of our workers from COVID-19. Now, we will get to a point where recovery starts to kick in. And I'm interested in how you think, the role that you think the Arts Wellbeing Collective will be able to play in that recovery phase for the sector and for individuals who work within it.
Oh, that's a good question. Do you know, I would say that there are two components to this that are connected. One is, I guess, the length of that recovery. So we need to remember, as you mentioned earlier, Claire, that we were some of the first to be impacted on by COVID-19 and the lockdown, and will be one of the very last to sort of emerge on the other side. And there is a lot, going on between times, and certainly within mental health more generally across the community. There is some talk around the idea of a second wave of the COVID-19 pandemic coming in the form of mental health issues. Mm-hmm. And I think that those in the performing arts are some of the hardest hit, given our context and, both in terms of the uncertainty, in terms of the financial hit, in terms of aspects of our, very identity. It will be a very long road where a lot of support is necessary. And I think that really, I guess, sowing the seeds and really getting into that work now will be essential for the months ahead, because I do think that it will be an integral part of recovery for the sector.
Yes, I think it's interesting, isn't it, when you think about the role that the sector itself will have in the broader recovery of the community, and the role that artists will play in helping us reflect on the experience that we've all been through. So I think, we're going into a time where we need our artists to be at their most brilliant, and yet we know that they have equally lived this trauma as well. And I think how we step into this next phase with curiosity about how it's going to roll out, and, accept that we don't know all of the answers at this stage, but, that we're still committed to the mental wellness of the sector, and that we are standing willing and able to work with the sector to support that recovery. I think your observation about this being a long road is right. I think venues will, which is obviously our business, will be one of the last areas to recover. But I think even when we reopen our doors and can have people back in the theatres, I think it's going to take a long time to get people to a level of confidence and comfort and that level of vibrancy that we were all experiencing before we closed. So I'm sort of a little pensive about what that future is going to hold, but we're committed, and the board of Arts Centre Melbourne and the Victorian Government are behind us in this, that the Arts Wellbeing Collective recognises that it has an important role to play and needs to sort of be ready to scale up in that response, which I suppose is, brings us to the campaign and how extraordinary it's been, how people have responded to that. And I don't know if you've had an opportunity to read some of the comments that have come in with the donations, but I hope that we'll be able to share those broadly, because I think that a lot of people in the sector will take a lot of comfort from how much support there is for artists in the broader community, and how people are yearning to get back into a live performance environment. I think everyone's just desperate to get back to it.
I completely agree. I think that the level of support that the campaign has demonstrated there is within the broader community for those who work in the performing arts. And this isn't just support in terms of funds that would go toward performance. This is support that go toward the human beings behind those performances. Yeah. And I think that that's as you say, that we can take a great deal of comfort knowing that there is that sense of being valued. And I think that means a lot to people who work within the performing arts. I mean, you've heard me talk before about this idea that we within the performing arts kind of rely on three forms of currency: one, money; one, around certainty; and one, around meaning and purpose. And given that even during the good times, the money and the sense of certainty, might be not as great as in some other industries, we tend to really draw a lot from meaning and purpose in what we do. We have big hearts. And I think to know that that is reciprocated within the community is something that is going to mean a lot to a lot of people who work within the performing arts industry. I think there is a recognition, because it is so patently obvious that, the art centres and the performing arts spaces are closed, that, these are people whose livelihoods have been just sort of had the rug swept out from under them. Even folks who had, sort of portfolio careers in the performing arts, maybe, worked as an usher as well as being a performer, or, maybe taught as well as being a performer, or indeed maybe engaged in work in the hospitality industry as well. So many of these, people within the performing arts have also been sort of doubly impacted, having so much of their livelihood and their sense of, I guess, security around that just taken away. So, yeah, but on the upside, as you say, there is definitely a sense of, I think, connection with and gratitude for the performing arts coming from the community out there, which is really beautiful.
Yeah, no, I really do feel that. It's it's good.
It is good. Yeah. Hey, Claire, I know that we're running out of time, but I really want to ask you one more question, which is, what are you most excited about for the future of the industry and Arts Centre Melbourne?
I guess in the immediate term, I am so excited about getting people back into a live performance environment. I think it's, whilst we've all been so blessed with the amazing digital content that's available to us, for me, I don't think anything can beat that experience of being in a theatre with other people, having that experience together. So I'm really, really excited about that. Longer term, I'm really interested to see what kind of work emerges from this situation. I think there will be many talented creatives who will be using this time and the time that will follow to really think about the kind of work that they want to present. So I'm excited to see what comes from it. But yeah, mainly just excited to get back into a live performance. Any live performance.
I can imagine. Yeah. Well, you and me both, Claire. You and me both. Hey, thanks so much for the chat today. It's been really great.
Really lovely. Thank you so much for everything that you do for so many individuals in your private practice, but really for what you do for the Arts Wellbeing Collective. It's extraordinary, Greta. So sincere thank you.
On that, I mean, I should say, really, this has all happened because of you.
Oh.
And because of, I guess, that, that foresight that you had and that sense of belief in the people within this industry, that, we don't have to suffer mental health issues, that we can, with the right support, get better, and we can flourish within our work, and we can have sustainable, fulfilling careers. So for that, and also for your leadership at the moment, nice one. And thank you.
No, thank you. And we should thank everyone who's tuned in to listen to this Q&A. Thank you for all of your support of the Arts Wellbeing Collective. It's enormously encouraging and motivating for all of us who are involved in it to know that there are so many people in the community who are interested and who support this work. So thank you.